Imagine being so incredibly powerful that your name literally becomes the Slavic word for king. Imagine ruling a massive empire that stretches across modern-day France, Germany, and Italy. Popes run to you for protection, and the legendary Caliph of Baghdad sends you a pet elephant just to stay on your good side. Now imagine that despite all this absolute jaw-dropping authority, you can barely write your own name. Welcome to the chaotic, brilliant, and deeply weird world of Charlemagne. Historically speaking, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, was an absolute giant, literally. When scientists opened his golden tomb in Aachen centuries later, they estimated his skeleton at a towering 6 feet or even 6'4". At a time when the average medieval guy was a modest 5'7", Charles towered over his subjects like a physical titan. He was a broad-shouldered, lively-eyed force of nature who loved wearing traditional Frankish cloaks, carried a golden-hilted sword named Joyeuse, and absolutely refused to eat boiled meat because he preferred his steaks roasted. But how did this towering warrior go from a standard medieval warlord to the father of Europe? Well, it all started with a classic case of medieval sibling rivalry. When King Pippin the Short died in 768, he split his kingdom between his two sons, Charles and Charlemagne. Charles got the outer, coastal regions, while Charlemagne received the inner territories. To say they didn't get along is an understatement. For 3 tense years, they hovered on the absolute brink of an all-out civil war. But in 771, Charlemagne died suddenly from a massive, convenient nosebleed. Charles immediately seized his brother's lands, sent his widowed sister-in-law running, and became the undisputed sole ruler of the Frankish realm. With the family drama settled, Charles turned his eyes outward. Over a 47-year reign, he launched more than 60 military campaigns. He marched down to Italy, defeated the Lombards, and casually crowned himself with their legendary Iron Crown. He then spent over 30 brutal years waging a relentless, bloody war against the pagan Saxons, chopping down their sacred tree pillar, the Irminsul, and enforcing Christian conversions at the absolute point of a sword. Not all of his campaigns were wild successes, though. In 778, Charles marched into Spain to fight the Moors. It went terribly. While retreating back through the Pyrenees, Basque guerrillas ambushed his rearguard in the narrow pass of Roncesvalles. The entire baggage train was wiped out, and several of Charles's top nobles, including Roland, the warden of the Breton March, were killed. This absolute military disaster ironically birthed the Song of Roland, one of the most famous epic poems of the medieval world. Despite the Spanish hiccup, Charles was the undisputed boss of Western Europe, and in the year 800, his career hit prime time. Pope Leo III in Rome was facing some serious local opposition. Angry Roman factions had literally assaulted him, attempting to cut out his tongue and blind him. Leo escaped, fled north to Charles's court at Paderborn, and begged for help. Charles, being the ultimate protector of the faith, marched down to Rome to restore order. On Christmas Day, while Charles was kneeling in prayer at St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo III crept up behind him and placed a golden crown on his head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. Charles's biographer, Einhard, claimed the king was totally surprised and even annoyed by this, famously stating he wouldn't have entered the church if he had known the Pope's plans, but modern historians call bluff. It was a brilliant, calculated PR move. It gave Charles imperial legitimacy to rival Constantinople while establishing a very sneaky precedent that popes are the ones who get to crown emperors. Now that Charles was an emperor, he faced a massive administrative nightmare. His empire was a linguistic soup of regional dialects, and the local clergy could barely read the Latin required for church services. So Charles launched the Carolingian Renaissance. He gathered the greatest intellectual minds of his day, most notably the English scholar Alcuin of York, to set up schools and standardize education. And here is where Charlemagne changed your daily life. Back then, books were written in regional Merovingian scripts that were incredibly messy, lacked punctuation, and had 0 spaces between words. Scribes at places like Corbie and Tours refined a new, beautifully rounded, standardized handwriting, Carolingian minuscule. It introduced consistent letter heights, word spacing, punctuation, and lowercase letters. When Renaissance printers looked for a clean, classic script centuries later, they copied this medieval handwriting. The very lowercase letters you're reading on your screen these days are a direct legacy of Charlemagne's court reform. Yet the man who sponsored this literacy boom couldn't quite master it himself. Einhard tells us Charles kept wax tablets and notebooks under his pillow so he could practice drawing letters in his spare time. But because he started so late in life, his efforts met with ill success. Charles's prestige travelled far beyond Europe. He struck up a famous, long-distance friendship with Caliph Harun al-Rashid of Baghdad. The two emperors showered each other with diplomatic gifts. Harun sent Charles a mind-bogglingly complex water clock that struck the hours with falling brass balls and mechanical knights alongside a massive, colourful linen tent. But the showstopper was Abul Abbas, a live Asian elephant. The beast travelled all the way from Baghdad to Charles's palace at Aachen. Charles absolutely adored his elephant, kept his Arabic name, and marched him around on military campaigns until the poor pachyderm sadly died of pneumonia in 810. Charlemagne passed away in 814 from pleurisy at the age of 72. True to Frankish tradition, his empire was eventually split among his grandsons in the Treaty of Verdun, fracturing the realm into territories that would eventually become France and Germany. But his most enduring legacy might be personal. Charles was notoriously prolific. He had at least 18 known children with a rotating cast of wives and concubines, and he loved his daughters so much he refused to let them marry, keeping them close to his court. Because his descendants married into noble houses across the continent, mathematicians and genealogists have calculated something amazing. Virtually every single person alive today with European ancestry is a direct descendant of Charlemagne. So, whether you are reading lowercase letters, checking a modern map of Europe, or just looking in the mirror, you are looking at the legacy of the towering, steak-loving, illiterate emperor who accidentally forged the Western world.